The National Electrical Code, or NEC, offers guidance on underground feeder or off wiring practices, especially when it transitions from a building's exterior to the soil. While the NEC doesn't explicitly mandate conduit in all situations, it's essential to understand the relevant sections and safety considerations. NEC Section 334.12b states that UF cable shall not be buried directly in the earth. NEC Section 334.12c specifies that UF cable shall be secured within 300 mm or 12 inches of the point where the non-metallic sheath terminates at outlets, panel boards, and where the cable enters or exits other enclosures. Even if the NEC doesn't have a hard rule, there are some important safety points that argue for using conduit where UF wiring goes from a building into the ground. Firstly, physical protection. Conduit is a shield, preventing mechanical damage. Think of shovels, landscaping tools, or even just settling soil shifting rocks. Without that shield, the UF wiring could be nicked, cut, or crushed, exposing the conductors and creating a hazard. Secondly, moisture resistance. UF cable is designed to handle moisture, but it's not waterproof. Over time, constant exposure to damp soil can degrade the insulation. Conduit adds an extra layer of protection against moisture intrusion, which can cause corrosion, shorts, and ground faults. Thirdly, rodent protection. Rodents love to chew on electrical wires. UF cable is no exception. A determined rodent can gnaw through the insulation, creating a fire or shock hazard. Conduit makes it much harder for rodents to access the wiring. Given these safety factors, using conduit for UF wiring that exits a building and goes into the ground is highly recommended. Here are some tips for putting in conduit the right way. Firstly, extend the conduit 300 mm or 12 inches beyond where the UF wiring enters the building. This protects the cable where it's most vulnerable. Secondly, seal the conduit entrance point to keep moisture out. Use a sealant or fitting designed for this purpose. Thirdly, use a conduit that's the right size for the UF wiring without jamming it. Overcrowding can damage the cable. Fourthly, secure the conduit to the building and along its run. This prevents it from being accidentally pulled or damaged. Now, there are a few situations where you might not need conduit. Firstly, direct burial. UF wiring rated for direct burial, often labeled UFB, is designed to be buried without conduit. However, even with direct burial rated cable, check local codes or regulations, as they may have their own specific requirements. Secondly, enclosed and finished spaces. If the UF wiring is in a protected spot, like a crawl space or attic, and it's shielded from physical damage, you might not need conduit. In conclusion, while the NEC doesn't always demand conduit for UF wiring going from a building to the ground, it's a smart move for safety's sake. Conduit protects against physical damage, moisture, and rodents, making your electrical system safer and more reliable. Always check your local codes and get advice from a licensed electrician to make sure you're following the rules and doing things the right way. Understanding the NEC and following best practices is key to safe and reliable electrical installations. The National Electrical Code is not law unless a local jurisdiction adopts it into law, so, firstly, you have to adhere to the local laws. Secondly, you have to adhere to the National Electrical Code. When using UF wiring for exterior circuits, consider its protection against physical damage, moisture, and rodents. Typically, conduit is recommended. Direct burial UFB cable is an exception, but always verify local regulations and best practices with an electrician to ensure electrical system safety. The decision of whether to encase underground feeder or off cable in conduit when it transitions from a building to the soil involves interpreting the National Electrical Code, understanding safety considerations, and applying best practices. The NEC does not explicitly require conduit for a UF cable in this scenario, but Section 334.12b restricts direct burial and Section 334.12c mandates securing the cable within 300 mm or 12 inches of enclosure exits. Safety is a primary concern. Conduit provides crucial physical protection against digging, landscaping, and other mechanical stresses that could damage the cable and expose conductors. It also acts as a moisture barrier, preventing corrosion and electrical hazards, and deters rodents from chewing on the wiring. Based on these factors, it is generally recommended to use conduit for UF cable as it exits a building and enters the soil. The conduit should extend 300 mm or 12 inches beyond the building, be sealed to prevent moisture, be appropriately sized to avoid overcrowding the wires, and be securely fastened. However, there are exceptions. UF cable rated for direct burial, typically marked as UFB, can be buried without conduit. Also, in enclosed, unfinished spaces like crawl spaces or attics, conduit may not be necessary if the cable is protected from physical damage. In summary, while the NEC does not mandate conduit, its use is highly recommended for enhanced safety, providing physical protection, moisture resistance, and rodent deterrence. Local codes and the advice of a qualified electrician should also be considered for compliance and best practices. When using UF wiring for exterior circuits, physical damage, moisture, and rodents are significant concerns. Conduit is generally recommended for protection unless using direct burial UFB cable, but always check local codes and consult an electrician to ensure electrical safety. Consider direct burial requirements if you will bury any cable without physical protection. The question of whether to use conduit for underground feeder or off wiring when it exits a building and enters the soil requires careful consideration of the National Electrical Code, safety factors, and accepted practices. The NEC doesn't directly mandate conduit in this situation, but Section 334.12b prohibits directly burying UF cable, and Section 334.12c requires securing the cable within 300 mm or 12 inches of enclosure exits. Safety is paramount. Conduit provides crucial physical protection against potential mechanical damage from digging or landscaping, which could expose or sever the conductors. Additionally, conduit acts as a moisture barrier, mitigating corrosion and related electrical hazards, and deters rodents from gnawing on the wiring, thereby reducing the risk of fire or shock. Given these safety considerations, using conduit for UF wiring as it transitions from a building to the soil is generally advised. The conduit should extend 300 mm or 12 inches beyond the building's edge, be sealed to prevent moisture intrusion, be sized appropriately to avoid overcrowding the wires, and be securely fastened along its run. Exceptions exist. UF cable rated for direct burial, typically identified as UFB, can be buried without conduit. Similarly, in enclosed, unfinished spaces such as crawl spaces or attics, conduit may not be required if the cable is adequately protected from physical damage. In conclusion, while the NEC doesn't mandate conduit, its use is strongly recommended for enhanced safety, offering physical protection, moisture resistance, and rodent deterrence. Compliance with local codes and consultation with a qualified electrician are essential to ensure adherence to regulations and best practices. When employing UF wiring for exterior circuits, prioritize protection against physical damage, moisture, and rodents. While conduit is often advised, direct burial UFB cable is an exception, but always verify local regulations and seek guidance from an electrician to ensure electrical system safety. Always remember local codes and regulations may further define such practices. Also, the authority having jurisdiction may overrule any recommendations or rules.